I remember those mornings like they were painted in soft, golden light. The sun would creep through the blinds, streaking the kitchen with warm lines, and I'd stand there, fumbling with my phone, trying to wake up before the day fully demanded me. There was this hum, the fridge, the kettle, distant traffic somewhere down the street, that formed the background of my life. Ordinary, predictable, safe. Breakfast was always the same. Toast, sometimes eggs, coffee strong enough to make the eyes sting if you weren't careful. The smell of it would float through the house, wrapping everything in a familiarity that, at the time, I didn't even think to appreciate. I'd take a sip, sit at the table, and just breathe. It felt like my little moment of peace before stepping into the day. Mom would shuffle in, usually still in her robe, hair messy from sleep. She had this laugh that could fill the kitchen. In an instant, the kind of laugh that made you forget whatever gray thoughts were lingering in your head. I remember one Sunday in particular. We'd been making pancakes, and somehow, flour ended up everywhere. On the counter, on the floor, even smudged across her cheek. She looked at me and just burst out laughing, and I laughed so hard my stomach hurt. That day, everything felt endless and safe. I didn't think that feeling would ever change. But life has a way of sneaking in little cracks before the walls crumble. At first, it was just tiny things, hardly noticeable. A sigh when I asked a question. A glance that lingered too long and seemed to carry a weight I couldn't name. Arguments over nothing. Who left the light on? Whose turn it was to wash the dishes? But brushed off with a sarcastic, "It's fine, don't worry about it." Like a bandage over a wound too small to see, but still tender underneath. Sometimes, I'd catch her watching me, eyebrows slightly furrowed, mouth tight, and I'd wonder if I had said the wrong thing, or if I was too much or not enough. But then she'd smile, and I'd let myself forget. Those smiles were so convincing that you'd almost believe everything was okay. Almost. Almost, I think that's why the subtle unease never fully registered. It was easy to ignore. I was young, maybe too trusting, and I wanted to believe that. Home was always a safe harbor. That the place you grew up in, where your memories clung like wallpaper, could never betray you. There was one evening, though, that still sticks with me. We'd just finished dinner, a quiet Thursday, nothing special, and I was leaning against the counter, scrolling through my phone while she washed the dishes. I glanced up, caught her expression for just a second, her lips pressed together, shoulders slightly tense. It was gone before I could really see it. She turned, smiled at me, but something in that flash of expression felt off that I remember thinking, I'll ignore it. She's tired. I'm overthinking. And I went back to my phone, pretending the feeling wasn't there. But the memory of it lingered, like a shadow stretching across the floor at sunset. Flashbacks like that would become more frequent over time. Small incidents, tiny cracks, all seeming insignificant at first, but each one adding weight. Arguments over trivial things, words left unsaid, emotions simmering beneath the surface. I didn't realize it yet, but those little tensions were breadcrumbs leading to something I couldn't have imagined. That morning, though, felt normal. I stood by the window, watching sunlight spill across the street, the smell of breakfast still warm in the air. Mom called my name from the kitchen, and I smiled, knowing she was still there, still laughing in those small, fleeting moments that made life feel bearable. I had no idea that the peace I felt was fragile, that every little argument, every fleeting sigh or glare, was setting the stage for a moment that would shake me to my core. And yet, there was a quiet beauty in that ordinary day. The kind that makes you nostalgic years later because you didn't know you were standing on the edge of something you weren't ready for. The calm before the storm. After that calm morning, things didn't immediately fall apart. Life carried on with its quiet rhythm, but somewhere beneath the surface, little warning signs were beginning to show. I didn't notice them at first. Who would? They were subtle, almost invisible, tucked into ordinary days like shadows at the edge of your vision. It started with her voice, just slightly sharper than usual. Not yelling, not yet, but that tiny edge that made my stomach twist. A word said too quickly, a sigh at the wrong moment. I would try to brush it off, telling myself, she's tired. I'm being sensitive. And maybe I was. But sensitivity doesn't explain the pit in your chest when you see someone you love suddenly tense over nothing. There was that Tuesday, for example. I'd borrowed her car to run a quick errand, and I returned it 5 minutes late. 5 minutes. Nothing catastrophic, nothing dangerous. But when I walked in, I caught the look on her face, tight lips, eyes narrowing just slightly, and my chest clenched. "Do you even think about anyone but yourself?" she asked, her tone measured but heavy. I opened my mouth, then closed it because I didn't know what to say. And that was the thing about these first red flags. They were confusing. One moment, everything seemed normal. The next, there was tension you couldn't quite name. I started noticing the little patterns. Her gaze lingering just a little too long, or disappearing too quickly. The way she'd murmur criticisms under her breath when she thought I wasn't listening. Or the way she'd roll her eyes at me over things that never mattered before. Flashbacks of my childhood began popping into my mind. Tiny moments I'd long forgotten. Like the time I brought home a report card with straight B's, and instead of congratulating me, she sighed and muttered something about how she expected more. I had buried that memory for years, but suddenly, it felt relevant again. It wasn't about the grades. It was the disappointment, the unspoken weight pressing down on me, telling me I wasn't enough. Some days, the tension was almost playful, like a quiet storm you didn't see coming. We'd be sitting at the kitchen table, sharing breakfast or scrolling through our phones, and suddenly there'd be this shift, a pause, a glance, a tightening of the jaw. I'd catch it, and my mind would race. Did I do something wrong? Was it me? But then she'd smile, laugh, or change the subject, and I'd exhale, convincing myself that everything was okay. Other times, the tension was sharper, almost imperceptibly cruel. The small digs disguised as jokes, the comments that seemed innocent in the moment but lingered in my mind long after she'd forgotten them. I started noticing them more and more, like cracks forming in the paint on a wall. At first, I thought it was me imagining things. But the truth was, it wasn't my imagination. Something was shifting. Something I didn't yet understand that I remember. One evening, standing in the hallway after she had gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the fridge and the occasional car passing by outside. I leaned against the wall, phone in hand, trying to distract myself with something. Anything, but my mind kept replaying every little interaction from the day. The tone of her voice when she asked if I'd clean my room. The sharpness in her laugh when I made a joke. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something important, some signal I was too naive to catch. And the more I replayed it, the more I realized these weren't isolated moments. They were patterns, small, but persistent. Little cracks in the foundation of what I thought was a safe, loving home. Yet, even with all of this, I still wanted to believe. I wanted to trust that what I saw wasn't reality, that it was just a phase, a bad day, a misunderstanding. Because accepting the truth, that the world you knew and trusted might be unstable, felt impossible. It felt like admitting that the floor beneath you wasn't solid, like realizing your hands could no longer hold the weight of what you thought was forever. Flashbacks became almost cruel in their timing. I'd think about times when mom had been kind, really kind, packing my lunch for school, checking on me when I was sick, hugging me without a reason, just because. Those memories made the tension feel even sharper, highlighting the contrast. If she could be that warm and loving, how could she also harbor this edge, this constant undercurrent of disappointment? By the end of that week, the unease was settling into my bones. I found myself walking through the house more cautiously, listening more carefully, trying to predict the moods that had once been so natural to navigate. I started questioning my every move. Did I say the wrong thing? Did I leave my laundry in the wrong place? Did I deserve the quiet disapproval I felt pressing down on me at unexpected moments? And somewhere, deep down, I knew that these first red flags were only the beginning. I couldn't put a name to the storm coming, but I could feel it lurking. It was in the pauses, in the glances, in the subtle tension that crept into our daily interactions. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, I couldn't. Because ignoring it wouldn't make it disappear, it would only make it grow, until one day, it would be impossible to ignore. That week, I realized life wasn't as calm as I thought. The golden mornings, the laughter, the smells of breakfast, those things still existed, but they were no longer enough to hide the tiny fissures forming beneath the surface. And even though I didn't know it yet, I was standing at the edge of something that would change everything. That I wish I could tell you that the tension built slowly, like a storm rolling in on the horizon. That would make it easier to understand, easier to prepare for. But it didn't. It hit suddenly, like a door slamming in the middle of a quiet room. One moment, we were in the kitchen, arguing over something meaningless, dishes left in the sink, a stray sock on the floor, and the next, her voice broke through me in a way I will never forget. "You're ungrateful. Get out and never come back." I froze. My brain tried to process the words, but they didn't make sense. Not really. Not coming back. Me? How could someone you've loved your entire life, someone who used to laugh with you over pancakes or brush your hair out of your face, just say that? My mouth opened, closed, and opened again, searching for the right thing to say, but nothing came. The kitchen felt different suddenly. The sunlight that had always made everything warm and safe now seemed harsh, cutting through the room like it had nothing to do with us. The smell of toast and coffee was still there, but it didn't comfort me. The hum of the fridge was just a background to the loud, thundering emptiness that had taken over my chest. My hands shook. I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my ears. I remember the way her eyes looked at me. Not just angry, something else was there. A mixture of frustration, disappointment, and maybe even hurt. I tried to reach for an explanation, some apology that would make this stop, but the words lodged in my throat. They wouldn't come out. And even if they had, I'm not sure they would have mattered. Flashbacks hit me like punches. I saw myself, as a kid, crawling into her lap after a bad day at school, and she had held me close, murmuring that everything would be okay. I remembered Sunday mornings, laughing over spilled pancake batter, the warmth of her hand brushing mine. And then, like cruel irony, I realized how quickly those memories had been replaced by this. A raw, sharp pain I couldn't ignore that I wanted to ask why. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something across the room and feel a release. But I couldn't. I was trapped between disbelief and fear, between wanting to run and wanting to make her understand that she was breaking me in that moment. My chest felt tight, my stomach knotted. The world had narrowed to that small, bright kitchen, and everything outside it didn't exist that I tried to remember the last time we had been truly okay. It came in fragments, a shared cup of coffee, a joke over the table, her smile lingering as I left for school. And now, that memory felt distant, like a photograph fading in the sun. I couldn't reconcile the mom I remembered with the voice that had just expelled me from my own home. My hands found the counter, gripping it as if holding on could anchor me. I noticed the small things, the cold steel of the faucet, the faint smell of lemon cleaner, the clutter of dishes, and they all seemed magnified, a sharp contrast to the surreal horror of her words. Every detail became a reminder that this was real, that I was standing on the edge of something I hadn't anticipated, something I couldn't just step back from. She was still shouting, and her words began to blur into a rhythm of anger and accusation. I could see the muscles in her jaw tense, her hands clenching at her sides. The sound of her voice felt like it was inside my skull, vibrating through my teeth. I wanted to cover my ears, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. And in that moment, time fractured. Seconds stretched out, each one heavier than the last. I remembered thinking, how did we get here? How did the laughter and pancakes and small comforts turn into this? I tried to piece it together, tracing back through arguments and sighs and small cracks in our relationship, but it didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. Then came the silence after her final words. She turned away, chest heaving, leaving me standing there, frozen, in the middle of the kitchen that had once felt like the safest place on earth. The room smelled faintly of burnt toast, coffee, and fear. My hands were trembling, my throat dry, and I couldn't breathe. I was paralyzed by a mix of shock, betrayal, and something that felt dangerously close to numbness. That I stumbled toward the hallway, dragging my feet, trying to gather my thoughts. Every memory of our past, every hug, every laugh, every small act of care clashed violently with the reality in front of me. The world had shifted, and nothing felt familiar anymore. Flashbacks kept coming in flashes, like a slideshow on repeat. I saw her packing my lunch for school, brushing my hair, tucking me in at night. I saw myself laughing at her jokes, leaning into her warmth. And now all of that warmth felt like a lie, a thin veneer covering something I hadn't been ready to face. That I sank against the wall, arms around my knees, staring at the floor as if it could provide some kind of refuge. But there was none. I realized In that quiet, agonizing moment, that the home I thought I knew was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battlefield, and I had just been told I wasn't welcome. And somewhere, beneath the shock and fear and rising panic, there was a small, trembling thought. I have to leave that I didn't speak. I couldn't. Every word I might have said felt heavy, useless, swallowed by the weight of her anger and my own disbelief. Instead, I did what I didn't want to do. I began to pack. That I opened my closet slowly, almost hesitantly, as if touching my clothes, my books, my life, would make it all vanish, or maybe make it real. The familiar smell of fabric and detergent mixed with the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. I shoved shirts into a bag, each fold feeling like a small betrayal. How could I take my things and leave her house, the place I'd always called home, without feeling like I was abandoning the memories, too? I moved mechanically, like I'd been rehearsing this without knowing it. Socks, jeans, notebooks, small trinkets. Each item seemed insignificant, but together they formed the tangible pieces of my life. My hands shook, and I caught myself gripping the zipper of my bag as if holding onto it would somehow anchor me, keep me from floating into the unknown. Flashbacks hit me in random waves. I remembered stacking my books on her lap when I was little, showing her the colorful drawings I'd made in school, and watching her smile like I'd painted the Mona Lisa herself. I thought about the afternoons spent folding laundry together, her humming softly while I clumsily tried to match socks. And now, the memories felt like fragile glass, breaking as I packed around them. The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt toast, though breakfast had long since ended. The hum of the fridge was louder somehow, a cold, mechanical reminder that life continued inside these walls even as mine was about to change. I could hear the distant sound of a car passing by, tires on wet pavement, and it made me flinch. Every ordinary sound felt amplified, reminding me that I was about to step into a world where those sounds wouldn't feel safe anymore. That I paused at her bedroom door. I wanted to see her one last time, to measure whether this was real, but the sight of her asleep, or pretending to be asleep, made my chest tighten. I couldn't face her right now. I couldn't. I would leave quietly, silently, because yelling, crying, arguing, none of that seemed to matter anymore. The hallway stretched before me, empty and echoing. I could feel the floor under my feet, hard and unyielding, and I felt like I was carrying more than just a bag. I was carrying a lifetime of hurt, confusion, and fractured trust. My mind raced with thoughts I couldn't form into sentences. Was I really ungrateful? Had I done something to deserve this? The questions bounced around like stones in a tin can, each one heavier than the last. I remember picking up a small notebook from my desk, a diary I hadn't touched in months. The pages smelled faintly of paper and ink, a comforting reminder of who I had been before today. I flipped through it, skimming the words I'd written: dreams, worries, trivial frustrations. Nothing prepared me for the reality of leaving. Nothing could make this feel normal. My bag was packed, heavy with clothes and memories alike. I glanced around the room one last time. The walls seemed too tall, the furniture too permanent, the silence too loud. The world outside waited, indifferent, while inside, the air felt thick with sorrow and disbelief. I made my way to the door, hand on the handle, and hesitated. The cold steel was a sharp contrast to the warmth I had known in this house. My heart raced. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, each second marking the finality of this moment. One last breath, one last look, and then I stepped out. The hallway was empty. The sunlight from the windows stretched across the floor, painting long, thin lines that seemed to guide me out. My bag bounced lightly against my hip, a dull, constant reminder that I was leaving everything behind. I could hear my own breathing, uneven and shallow, the sound amplified in the silence. Outside, the world felt different. The air was cool against my skin, tinged with the faint scent of rain. Leaves rustled in the trees lining the street, and a distant dog barked somewhere down the block. The normal sounds of the neighborhood, once comforting, now reminded me that I was no longer safe inside my own home. That I walked slowly, each step deliberate, as if moving too quickly would make this all a dream, and I'd wake up back in the kitchen, laughing over pancakes with her. But there was no going back. I realized then that leaving wasn't just about escaping the anger or the words. It was about survival, about taking care of the part of me that still believed I deserved respect and safety. Flashbacks mixed with the present, a cruel montage of what had been and what could have been. I remembered her hugging me tightly on a rainy day, whispering that everything would be all right. I remembered us cooking together, dancing in the kitchen to music only we could hear. And now, all that warmth existed only as memory, a haunting echo as I walked further down the street, bag in hand, toward a future I couldn't yet see. By the time I reached the corner, the house was behind me, shrinking with every step. I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief, grief and liberation. The bag was heavy, my heart heavier, but I knew I had to keep moving. The life I knew had ended in that kitchen, and there was no turning back. And as I walked away, I realized something that cut sharper than her words. Leaving didn't mean forgetting. Leaving meant carrying it all with me. The hurt, the confusion, the memories, the love, and the loss. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for the wait, but I knew I had no choice. The first night out of that house felt surreal. The air was colder than I expected, carrying the faint scent of rain on asphalt, and each breath felt both foreign and intoxicating. I realized, somewhere between the street lamps' haloed glow and the rhythm of my own footsteps, that I was finally free. Free from the anger, free from the accusations, free from a place that had once been safe but had turned sharp at the edges. There was a strange kind of exhilaration in the solitude. I walked slowly, letting my feet take me wherever they wanted. The streets were quieter than I remembered, shadows stretching long and thin under the dim lights. Each sound, distant traffic, the bark of a dog, the soft rustle of leaves, felt magnified, almost celebratory, like the world was acknowledging that I had finally stepped into it on my own terms. And yet, even in the freedom, there was a hollow ache. Every corner I turned, I half expected to see her standing there, arms crossed, glaring, or perhaps waiting for me to stumble back. But no one was there. Just me, my bag swinging lightly against my hip, my heartbeat loud in my chest. It was liberating and terrifying. All at once I found a quiet coffee shop, open late, the warm glow inside spilling out onto the wet sidewalk. I pushed the door open and was greeted by the familiar scent of roasted beans, cinnamon, and the faint sweetness of pastries. The clinking of cups and the low hum of conversation felt almost sacred, a sanctuary where I could sit and let the weight of everything sink in. I ordered a coffee, black, and sat by the window, watching the city blur past, the steam rising from the cup mingled with the cool night air, forming a soft, fleeting cloud that mirrored my own uncertainty. I felt a shiver of loneliness, a sharp reminder that freedom wasn't the same as safety. I could move, I could breathe, I could choose, but I was completely alone in it. Flashbacks surfaced unbidden. I remembered Sunday mornings at home, Mom, humming while we made pancakes, the smell of butter and syrup filling the kitchen, the warmth of her hand brushing mine. Those moments had been effortless, comforting, a rhythm I had taken for granted. Now, they felt distant, almost unreachable, like memories from someone else's life that I found myself pulling my knees to my chest, staring out at the rain-slicked street. The freedom I had longed for came with a cost I hadn't fully considered, the absence of comfort, of familiarity, of someone who, despite everything, had been a constant in my life. And yet, there was a thrill in the absence, too. A small voice inside me whispered, "This is yours now. You can decide what comes next." The first taste of freedom was messy. I laughed quietly at the absurdity of feeling both terrified and exhilarated at the same time. I thought about the life I'd left behind, the small routines, the arguments, the love that had coexisted with anger. It was strange to realize that leaving didn't erase the past. It simply created space for something new. That I wandered the streets for hours, letting my thoughts drift with the city lights. Storefronts reflected in puddles, neon signs flickered, and the wind carried the faint scent of rain-soaked pavement. I felt untethered but alive, each step a quiet declaration. I am here. I exist. I am moving forward. Flashbacks blended with the present in a bittersweet montage. I remembered packing my bag, the weight of my clothes in my hands, the smell of old perfume and detergent lingering. I remembered her yelling, the sharpness of her words still echoing in my chest. And now, I sat in a small coffee shop, surrounded by strangers, feeling the weight of my choice and the strange lightness of having made it, that I realized that this was the beginning of learning who I was outside the walls I had grown up in. The first night out wasn't about adventure or joy. It was about survival, about existing in a space where my own thoughts weren't constantly interrupted by judgment or disappointment. And even in the loneliness, there was a subtle, fragile hope forming. By the time I returned to the small apartment I had rented, the city was quiet, almost reverent. The streets smelled of rain and possibility, the lamps casting long shadows that danced across empty sidewalks. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, greeted only by the faint hum of the heater and the echo of my own breathing. It felt unfamiliar, but it was mine, completely mine. I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, my bag still at my side. I thought about the first time I had ever left home. As a child, sleepovers, school trips, small adventures. I had always returned, reassured by the knowledge that home would be waiting. This was different. This time, there was no guarantee. This time, I had to create my own space, my own safety, my own sense of belonging. And somewhere, between the relief, the fear, and the aching loneliness, I understood that freedom was never simple. It was complicated, heavy, and sometimes painful, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long while, I felt that spark of control, of possibility, of life moving forward in my hands. The first few days after leaving home were a strange blur of freedom and panic. I had this illusion that once I stepped outside, everything would be simpler, lighter, but reality hit like a cold wave, dragging me under. Walking through my small apartment, I realized that the comforts of my old life, my mom's presence, the predictable rhythm of chores and meals, the unspoken safety of home, were gone. And now, it was all on me. The fridge hummed quietly, empty except for a few items I had bought with borrowed change. I stared at it for a long moment, suddenly aware that no one was going to make me breakfast, check if I'd eaten, or remind me to drink water. The silence was almost oppressive. I realized how little I knew about living alone. I didn't know how to plan meals, how to pay bills on time, how to make a space feel like home rather than just a place to crash. The first stack of bills arrived a few days later. They sat on the kitchen table, stiff and official, mocking my naivety. Electricity, internet, water, everything required decisions, responsibility, money I barely had. I sat there, hands over my face, feeling the weight of adulthood descend. In waves, the world I had imagined when leaving home, freedom, control, possibility, was now mixed with dread, responsibility, and a gnawing fear of failure. Flashbacks surfaced in quiet, unguarded moments. I remembered sneaking a glance at my mom's checkbook as a child, watching her balance numbers and stress lines without understanding. I had laughed at the way she frowned at figures on a page, thinking it was just grown-up stress. Now I understood. And now, it was my turn. The apartment itself was stark, almost alien. The hum of the heater, the squeak of the floorboards, the faint smell of damp from the corner where a window leaked slightly. These were the sounds and sensations I had to live with. Every creak made me jump, every shadow on the wall reminded me I was truly alone. And the loneliness was deeper than I expected, more raw than the freedom I had felt in those first moments outside that I tried to keep myself busy. Laundry, dishes, budgeting, small errands. But each task carried a quiet dread. I would sit staring at the pile of clothes, unsure if I remembered how to even use the washing machine properly. I'd hesitate at the stove, wondering if I could cook something edible without burning it. Even walking through the streets outside felt heavier now that I wasn't just exploring. Now I had to navigate, decide, and survive a tea night. The silence hit hardest. No hum of a familiar refrigerator, no distant conversation or occasional laugh from the next room. Just me, alone with my thoughts. The dark corners of the apartment seemed to stretch, to fill with shadows that mirrored my insecurities. I'd lie awake, heart racing, thinking about Mom. Thinking about what I had left behind, wondering if leaving was the right choice. Was I selfish? Was I wrong? Flashbacks blended into the present in ways that sometimes made me cry without warning. I remembered moments of guidance she had given me, small acts of care I had once taken for granted, fixing a hem, washing a shirt, listening to a story about my day with genuine interest. Those memories were bittersweet, reminding me that home had once been warm, even if it had become sharp and unkind. Bills, errands, chores, they were a constant reminder that freedom came with a price. I learned quickly that every choice mattered. Leaving the lights on meant a higher bill. Skipping meals meant my body grew sluggish, weak. Procrastinating on responsibilities made my anxiety flare. Every mistake felt amplified, every small failure. A reminder that I couldn't rely on anyone else. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, a quiet determination began to emerge. I realized that being alone didn't mean being powerless. I had the chance to rebuild, to create routines and spaces that made sense to me. Slowly, I learned to cook a simple meal without fear, to balance my small budget, to organize my apartment into a place that felt like mine. Each small victory, paying a bill on time, cooking a decent dinner, navigating the city streets without panic, was a reminder that I could survive this. But survival came with loneliness as a constant companion. I missed the small, mundane interactions I had once taken for granted. Mom calling my name from the kitchen, someone asking if I'd eaten, the subtle comfort of shared space, and the pangs of doubt. Did I make the right choice? Returned nightly, echoing in the quiet apartment like a ghost. The first week alone was a strange mixture of fear, frustration, and quiet triumph. I was exhausted, yes, but I was also learning who I was outside the confines of home. The world felt bigger, more intimidating, but also more alive. Every sound, every task, every breath was a test, and a lesson rolled into one dot. And in the still moments, when I leaned against the wall and let myself breathe, I realized something important. This solitude was temporary, but it was also necessary. To understand my own strength, to confront the feelings that had been buried under years of anger and love, I had to face reality alone. The freedom I had tasted in the first nights outside wasn't just about escape. It was about survival, self-reliance, and slowly, painfully, discovering who I really was. Even as I tried to settle into my new life, memories kept finding me. They weren't gentle reminders. They hit like waves when I least expected it. A whiff of something familiar, a faint smell of vanilla from a candle, the distant sound of laughter on the street, would twist me back to the kitchen at home, where sunlight poured through the blinds and Mom's voice was warm and teasing. Died. Be walking down a quiet street, and suddenly I'd see a flash of movement in a shop window, a reflection of someone bending over a counter, and my heart would lurch. For a moment, I'd think she was there, calling my name, asking if I'd eaten, laughing at one of my stupid jokes. And then reality hit again, sharp and cold. She wasn't. She had shouted those words that changed everything, and I had left. The nights were hardest. Alone in my apartment, the walls seemed thinner somehow. Every creak in the floorboards, every distant sound of traffic or footsteps reminded me of how small and vulnerable I felt. I would curl up on the couch, clutching a blanket, and let the memories wash over me. I thought about the pancakes we used to make, the flour on our faces, her laughter echoing in the warm kitchen. I thought about bedtime stories, her hand smoothing my hair, her soft voice telling me everything would be okay. Flashbacks were relentless. I saw her packing my lunch before school, tucking me in after a feverish night, calling me from work to make sure I had eaten. I remembered arguments too. The small disagreements that seemed trivial then, but now felt like signs I hadn't fully understood. Every memory was sharp-edged, a mixture of love and loss, comfort and pain that I found myself replaying our fights, trying to understand why it had escalated to the moment she screamed at me. Was I really ungrateful? I asked myself the question over and over, like a mantra, hoping to find an answer that made sense. But the truth was, there was no easy answer. Love and anger had been tangled together for so long that separating them felt impossible. Even ordinary things, the smell of rain on asphalt, the sound of a distant dog barking, the hum of my heater at night, became triggers for memory. They brought me back to moments I had once taken for granted, moments that now seemed like fragments of a life I could never reclaim. Each flashback carried a pang of sorrow and guilt, and I realized that leaving home didn't erase my love for her. It only made the absence heavier. Sometimes, I would sit in my apartment, staring out the window at the city lights, and let myself grieve. I grieved the loss of comfort, of predictability, of a bond that had once felt unbreakable. I grieved the harshness of her words, the betrayal, the rupture that had left me feeling both unmoored and raw. And yet, I also grieved the loss of the mom I had once known, the warmth that had existed before anger took over. Flashbacks merged with reality in unexpected ways. I would reach for my phone to text her, only to remember she had said, "Get out," and never come back. The urge to reach out, to reconcile, to hear her voice, would strike me sharply, and then I'd remember why I couldn't. And that tension, the pull between love and hurt, was exhausting, leaving me teetering between hope and despair. The apartment, once a symbol of freedom, sometimes felt like a cage. I could cook for myself, pay my bills, walk the streets freely, but the memories haunted me, filling the rooms with echoes of a home I had left behind. The smells, the sounds, the warmth I had once taken for granted, they were all ghosts now, lingering in corners and edges, impossible to escape. That I started writing again, trying to capture the memories in words. The pages became a mix of anger, sorrow, nostalgia, and reflection. I wrote about the mornings, the laughter, the arguments, the shouts, the moments I had loved and lost. Writing felt like a lifeline, a way to process the complex mix of emotions that living alone had unearthed. Some nights, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, and whisper into the dark, "I miss you. I love you, but I can't stay." The words felt both true and impossible, like trying to hold water in my hands. The pain of loving someone who had hurt me so deeply was a constant companion, and I realized that the process of healing wouldn't erase the memories. It would just teach me how to live with them. And somewhere in the sorrow, there was a quiet truth. Memories, even painful ones, kept me connected to who I was. They reminded me of love, of warmth, of the person I had been and the person I was becoming. They haunted me, yes, but they also shaped me, pushing me to confront my feelings, to feel deeply, and to start understanding the complexity of relationships. Love and loss. By the end of the week, I realized that haunting wasn't always a bad thing. It meant that the past mattered, that love and pain could coexist, and that even in separation, those memories were part of my journey. They were a reminder that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning to carry what mattered, without letting it break me. It wasn't sudden. Strength doesn't usually arrive like a lightning bolt. For me, it crept in quietly, like sunlight through a half-closed window, gradually warming the cold corners of my life. I started noticing it in the small things first, making my bed without thinking, cooking a decent meal for myself, paying a bill without panicking. Each tiny victory felt insignificant at the moment, but they piled on top of each other, shaping a foundation I hadn't realized I was building. I remember one evening, standing in the kitchen, stirring a pot of pasta while the rain tapped against the window. I was alone, yes, but there was a satisfaction in this independence. No one to criticize, no one to tell me I was ungrateful, no one shouting that I didn't belong. Just me, the rhythmic hiss of the stove, the smell of simmering tomato sauce, and the realization that I could take care of myself. For the first time, it felt like I mattered, to myself. Flashbacks still came, but now they served a different purpose. Instead of dragging me down, I used them to understand, to process, to grow. I thought about the arguments with Mom, the shouting, the tension. I acknowledged the hurt she caused, and I allowed myself to feel the anger without letting it consume me. It was liberating, like releasing a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for years. Work became another anchor. Even the mundane tasks of a job, the emails, the deadlines, the small victories of completing a project, grounded me. Each responsibility I handled, each problem I solved on my own, reminded me that I was capable. I didn't need approval. Not from anyone, not even her. I had my own power, quietly, steadily growing inside me. That I began to notice my resilience in more unexpected ways, too. Walking through the streets at night, alone, I didn't feel the same fear I had in the first days. The city noises, the distant hum of traffic, the echo of footsteps, the occasional shout or siren, no longer made my chest tighten. Instead, they reminded me that I was navigating the world successfully, that I could stand on my own, and that the world didn't have to intimidate me. Flashbacks became lessons. I remembered Mom's strength too, the way she had managed our household, her sharp wit, her ability to command a room. I realized that some of that resilience had rubbed off on me, even if it had been tangled up with anger and disappointment. I could see now that strength wasn't about being unyielding. It was about enduring, adapting, and continuing, even when it hurt. That I also found strength in small rituals that grounded me. Morning coffee with the sun spilling over my apartment floor. Evening walks where I could think without judgment. Journaling, writing down the messy tangle of emotions, letting them bleed onto paper until they made sense. I discovered that these small acts weren't indulgences. They were fortifications, building the person I needed to be to survive and thrive. Social connections, too, became sources of resilience. I reached out to friends I had neglected, forming bonds not dependent on family drama. I learned to accept support without feeling weak, to let others see my vulnerabilities without shame. It wasn't easy, trust had been fractured, but slowly, I realized that strength didn't mean isolation. Strength meant knowing when to rely on myself and when to allow others in. There were moments, of course, when doubt crept back. Nights when memories of her voice, sharp, angry, dismissive, made me question myself. But I learned to face those moments differently. Instead of letting them define me, I let them remind me of why I had left, of why I needed to claim my own life. The pain remained, but it no longer paralyzed me. It became a reminder of how far I had come. One day, as I sat by my apartment window watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, I realized something profound. I had survived. Not just the yelling, not just the leaving, not just the loneliness. I had survived the emotional storm and had started building a life on my own terms. That realization hit me with a quiet, almost tender force, and I allowed myself a small, private smile. Strength, I discovered, wasn't a single act of courage. It was the accumulation of moments, the decisions I made daily, the boundaries I set, the self-respect I nurtured, and the care I showed myself. It was messy, sometimes frightening, and often exhausting, but it was mine. Every day I woke up and faced the world, I was proving it to myself first and foremost. That by the end of that week, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: agency. My life wasn't dictated by anger or disappointment anymore. My steps were my own, my decisions my own, my mistakes my own. And with that ownership came a profound sense of strength, one that didn't erase the past, but gave me the power to carry it without being crushed by it. The message came unexpectedly. A simple text: "Can we talk?" My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the vibration cutting through the quiet hum of my apartment. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let it fade into the background like so many things I had learned to leave behind. But something made me pause. The words were careful, restrained, different from the shouting, the accusations, the finality of the day I left. That I stared at the screen, hands trembling slightly. The apartment felt suddenly heavy, filled with the ghosts of old arguments and soft laughter I hadn't realized I missed. I remembered the mornings we shared, the way sunlight used to spill over the table, the scent of coffee and toast mingling with her perfume. I remembered her hand brushing mine, gentle and familiar, and my chest tightened. I wanted closure, but I was terrified of what that would mean. When I finally replied, I kept it simple. "Okay." The word felt fragile, a small bridge stretching across the chasm of months filled with anger, silence, and distance. My mind raced with possibilities. Would she apologize? Would she blame me again? Would this conversation reopen wounds I had fought so hard to keep closed? The day we met, I felt the familiar knot in my stomach. I walked into the park where we had agreed to meet, the soft crunch of leaves under my shoes grounding me in the present. She was there, sitting on a bench, her posture hesitant, shoulders slightly slumped. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns across the ground, almost as if nature itself was pausing to hold its breath for this moment. When she saw me, her eyes softened. I could see the worry, the regret, the love tangled up with all the anger I remembered. There was no shouting, no sharp words, just the quiet weight of acknowledgement. She looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw the mom I had always known behind the wall of frustration and disappointment. That we talked. Slowly, carefully. Words stumbled out at first, awkward and heavy, but eventually they found rhythm. She apologized, not for everything, but for the words that had hurt me so deeply. I listened, feeling the sting of old memories, but also recognizing the sincerity in her voice. And when I spoke, I didn't hold back either. I told her how it had felt to be pushed away, to leave the home that had once been my sanctuary, and the fear and loneliness that followed. Flashbacks surfaced in the quiet moments between sentences. The laughter in the kitchen, the flour on our hands, the whispered bedtime stories. They weren't perfect memories. They were layered with the tension and pain of our past, but they reminded me why closure mattered. They reminded me that love and hurt often coexist, tangled and complex, and that healing requires both acknowledgement and vulnerability. She didn't try to defend herself too aggressively, didn't insist that her anger was justified. She listened, really listened. And in that listening, I felt something shift, a fragile bridge forming between the fractured pieces of us. The park around us seemed to hold its breath, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant chatter of children, the occasional bark of a dog. All small witnesses to the tentative reconciliation unfolding that I realized that closure wasn't about forgetting. It wasn't about pretending that the words shouted in anger never existed. It was about understanding, acknowledging, and reclaiming a relationship that had been damaged but not destroyed. It was about seeing each other as humans, flawed and vulnerable, capable of love and mistakes in equal measure. By the end of our conversation, the tension that had clung to me for months felt lighter. Not gone. Healing isn't instant, but lighter. I felt a quiet gratitude for the chance to speak, to hear, to be heard. We didn't solve everything. We didn't erase the past. But we took a step toward a new understanding, a new way of being together that included honesty, respect, and, finally, some measure of peace. Walking away from that park, I felt a strange mix of relief and wistfulness. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the path. I carried with me both the pain of what had been and the hope of what could be. Closure wasn't a neat package. It was messy, bittersweet, and profoundly human. That I thought about all the nights I had cried alone, the fear I had carried, the freedom I had fought for, and I understood that this was all part of the journey. Closure didn't erase the struggle, it honored it. It made the laughter sweeter, the love more nuanced, and the distance traveled more meaningful. And somewhere in the quiet glow of the evening, I allowed myself to feel it fully. The relief, the acceptance, and the fragile but undeniable love. That remained. I had left, I had survived, and I had returned. Not to the old life exactly, but to a new chapter, one where strength, understanding, and love could coexist. Sitting by my apartment window, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky, I finally let myself breathe. The weight of the past months, the shouting, the leaving, the loneliness, the uncertainty hadn't vanished. It never would completely. But for the first time, I could see it for what it was, a journey that had forced me to grow, to survive, and to truly understand myself. That I thought about how far I had come. I had left the home that had once been everything to me, stepped into the unknown, faced fear and solitude, and discovered a strength I didn't know I had. I had wrestled with grief, nostalgia, anger, and love, sometimes all at once. I had learned that life isn't neat, that relationships are messy, and that personal growth often comes wrapped in pain. And yet, despite all of it, I was still here, whole, alive, and slowly learning to thrive. Flashbacks drifted through my mind, not like ghosts haunting me, but like lessons softly nudging me forward. I remembered the laughter in the kitchen, the mornings of comfort, the arguments that had ended in tears. I remembered walking away, the first nights of uncertainty, and the tentative steps toward independence. I remembered the moment of connection. With Mom again, sitting in the park, letting the words flow, letting the silence between us speak as loudly as our voices. And now, I realized something I hadn't understood before. Moving forward wasn't about forgetting, not really. It wasn't about pretending the pain hadn't existed. It was about taking the lessons, the memories, and the experiences, and letting them shape me into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate, both to myself and to others. The city outside my window was alive, buzzing with stories, struggles, and triumphs that had nothing to do with me and everything to teach me. The hum of traffic, the distant laughter, the faint smell of rain on concrete. All of it reminded me that life was bigger than the walls I had left behind, bigger than the shouting, bigger than my fear. And in that realization, I found peace. Not perfect peace, but a quiet, steady sense that I could handle what came next. I thought about the small victories, the moments that had seemed trivial at the time, but now felt monumental. Cooking my own meals, paying my bills, walking through the streets alone without fear, facing memories without breaking down. Each act of independence had built a foundation I could rely on, brick by brick, until I realized I had a life of my own. One I could shape, nurture, and protect. Closure with mom hadn't fixed everything, but it had reminded me that love is rarely simple. It is messy, complicated, and often uncomfortable, but it's also worth honoring. I could carry the hurt without letting it define me, and I could carry the love without being trapped by it. Both existed together, and I had learned how to hold them in balance. That I leaned back, letting the quiet hum of my apartment wash over me. The smell of coffee lingered faintly from earlier, mingling with the cool evening air drifting through the window. I thought about tomorrow, the weeks ahead, the challenges yet to come, and for the first time, I felt a spark of excitement rather than fear. There was a world waiting, full of possibilities, and I knew I had the strength to meet it head-on. I allowed myself a small, almost shy smile. It wasn't triumphal or boastful. It was quiet, reflective, the kind of smile that comes from understanding your own resilience. I had survived anger, abandonment, loneliness, and uncertainty. I had found freedom, learned to face reality alone, and discovered a core strength that no one could take from me. And that was enough. For now. As the city lights shimmered like tiny stars scattered across the dark streets, I realized that moving forward wasn't about leaving the past behind. It was about carrying it with me in a way that didn't weigh me down, in a way that reminded me of how far I'd come and how much I could endure. Each memory, each lesson, each ache of sorrow had shaped me, but they didn't define the rest of my story. I could still write it, day by day, choice by choice, step by step. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I felt it. Hope. Not the naive hope of a child, waiting for the world to hand her safety on a silver platter, but the steady, enduring hope of someone who has faced fear, walked through darkness, and emerged on the other side with the knowledge that they are capable, worthy, and alive. That I picked up my journal, pen poised, and let the words flow. The story wasn't over, not even close, but I had found the strength to write it for myself, and that was everything.